I'm moving to East Boston in 2 days, so that's exciting.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Yeah.
How's packing going?
Pretty good. Got some boxes back here. I'm not losing my exposed brick though. My new place has exposed
Okay.
brick.
Oh,
Good.
good. Need that.
Priorities.
Can I move in?
Yeah.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Without a Roadmap. This is the show for product people who don't know all the answers. We plan to tell the stories of folks who get the job done but are still figuring it out. My name is Yonas.
And my name is Cam. Yonas and I are both PMs at Parlor, which is an early stage startup located in downtown Boston. And today we're joined by Amy, who's a PM for the city of Boston. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Amy Wipfler. I'm product owner with the City of Boston, specifically in the Department of Neighborhood Development, which is responsible for producing affordable housing in the City of Boston.
Awesome. So I think one way to kick this off and start this thing off is kind of go into like your journey about how you got to being a product owner at the City of Boston.
Sure. Yeah. So I graduated from Tufts University here in the Boston area, now 7 years ago, and have always been a pretty civically minded person. I actually started my career doing AmeriCorps, which I highly recommend. It's a great way to serve the country without signing up for the military. So I enjoyed my time just hitting the streets and doing volunteer recruitment, volunteer coordination for a literacy nonprofit. A lot of volunteer engagement, and in some ways actually like really good practice for being a PM, because so much of your job is working with people, using a lot of soft influence. So I was sort of on my path, even though I didn't know it at the time. And I moved back I did that AmeriCorps out in California where I grew up. I ended up moving back to Boston since, my second family's here. My partner started grad school. And I joined a startup called Zagster, which was focused on bike sharing. They were about 25 people at the time. I was their second customer service team member, and really dived into it. I have, as you can tell, a passion for bikes, and it was really fun to start connecting with customers and making these bike shares work all over the country. A lot of hustle, a lot of grit. And within a year was managing the team. We had scaled it to 3 people, and was, developing new Salesforce platform for handling customer requests, was taking on a lot of NPS and user experience pieces that we didn't really have capacity for as a small growing company. And so when we did eventually do our third round of funding, space opened up for me on the product team as a product analyst, which started giving me the tools I needed around product management, data analytics, really even some design pieces of designing better user education flows, and really loved that niche. I was like, okay, I'm definitely a product person, not a customer service person, because I like thinking super proactively and trying to put myself in the user's shoes before they hit some sort of pitfall with the product. So was lucky enough to get that experience, and Zagster went through some downsizing, and I took on a few consulting roles because I wasn't quite sure where I wanted to land in the product space. I think a lot of people might commiserate with the fact that like product roles are very wide ranging and like hard to decipher. I was like, I'm a product analyst. What does that mean? And I decided the best way out of like my existential like product life was to just try different roles. So I did some user experience research for a mental health startup. I also did some market research and like product design for a retail company. And after that was like, you know what, I really feel like aiming for something that's like an associate PM, product owner. If I can wrangle it, product manager is my wheelhouse. I definitely am a UX PM. I think there's so many different types of PMs out there.
Yep, for sure.
And that's one thing I love about this role is that there's a lot of different things in play in government and especially civic tech. So many different stakeholders involved. And oftentimes it can be easy to have the constituent sort of pushed into a smaller and smaller range of impact on the end product. And so I love this role because I feel like I get to keep going to residents in Boston and people who are using our sites, and as well as my internal teammates, and just say, what do you need? Like, what would make it better? What's actually valuable here for you? How can we keep making the small steps to improve these products? And so it's definitely my first role in government. I've only been here 8 months, so I don't claim to be an expert yet. I don't think I'll ever be an expert in product management because there's just so much to know. But at the same time, I'm loving it. I get to work on a tool that makes a difference in a lot of people's lives, and we'll be launching a new release in a few weeks. So that's really exciting.
Nice. Yeah, thanks for that background. A lot of interesting things there about your journey. One thing that I think is super timely, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on, are the transition after Zaxter's downsizing into consulting roles, and like what that was like for you, and maybe some tips, because I imagine there's a lot of people, especially folks in products, who have been furloughed or laid off recently.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I've always thought, like, what does it take? Because then you really have to have a you have to be really confident in your skills and capability to go as like kind of a lone wolf going to work on some sort of project. So I'm curious, like, what's going on in your mind, and what did you feel like how are you presenting yourself? And then in the roles that you were doing, or in the consulting roles, like, what was your day-to-day like?
About the transition into consulting, it was really daunting. A lot of people after the downsizing, Zaxter was great. They helped us find role opportunities that would match. I interviewed to be like a product analyst at Love Pop. Like, they were really good about setting us up with connections. So I really hope that's happening for people, of like, even if there isn't space for you at the company, that the network is there for you if you do want a new full-time role, and making those things happen. I took the consulting path and was definitely nervous about it. I sort of always thought like consultants are like this echelon of people who like know a lot of things. And I was like, can I pull that off? So you should definitely just like act overconfident and like review and think about all the ways you could bring value to various sections of product development. That was really helpful for me. It was finding projects that like were, the most work was actually getting the project scope. I was working with 2 CEOs. They had a lot on their plate. And when I talked to them about what they wanted, one, they wanted everything, but at the same time, it was just like really hard to scale in. Like, what do you really need? What's a good scope of work? Am I the right person for it? And then figuring out your rates and all of that. So I would say that took probably like almost half the time of the project was just getting a good scope. And I think it's a great opportunity to, like I said, try out like a sampler plate, right? If you're like not sure if you like the whole thing, I love the fact that I was like, I'm just gonna try just doing UX research and see if that's fulfilling. I'm gonna try just doing this market research, see how that goes. And being able to sort of tease apart, because product managers in general, I think, become roles that have so many hats combined into one, right? You have like wearing like a top hat, like all with the ceiling with many different layers, which is great. It makes them like really powerful people within a company, but it can also be really overwhelming to know what parts are actually satisfying when you're trying to do all of that at once. So I love the fact that I was able to sort of tease apart, and it turned out like the market research stuff, not so big on that. And product design, I like having a say in it. I'm not great at it. So, going with but the user research definitely made me feel more like, okay, I not only want to do this, but I also want to make sure I have a say in how it works into the strategy. So it sort of helped me figure out that I didn't want a pure UX research role, because you never really know what's going to happen with the research unless you're in a product role, where then you're really figuring out, okay, how do we apply this? How does this line up against other needs? But I would say go for consulting. Do prepare yourself for the tax situation. And also just like, I was amazed how much when I was doing it, I was part of a few networks like She Geeks Out, Boston Product, some really great different Boston groups, just posting on Slack channels saying, hey, I'm available and here's what I do, and listing like 3 or 4 things. I got so many leads out of that. I was I was amazed. I was like, this is silly, but I might as well try posting to these Slack channels where I don't really know anyone.
Yeah. I was gonna ask, like, how did you like get in contact with these companies to get consulting roles?
Yeah. I mean, I did a LinkedIn post, but that got like almost no traction. But these Slack communities, I think because they're a little bit more targeted and they are really about like solidarity and helping each other, people are always paying it forward there. And, you know, so many people are inside of companies that have these needs that are never going to post things, right? I saw nothing posted for consultants. I made both of these projects become needed projects. So there was sort of this like persuading CEOs, like, yeah, this is a good idea. I can do this. It's 12 weeks. How much is that in your budget? You know, like that kind of thing. But it was getting that connection and understanding what the company need was from the inside made it a lot easier to find projects that were fulfilling both for me and for the company.
Yeah, well, thanks for giving a little insight on that. That's something I would definitely look into. I think there's a lot of benefits there too, you know, just in the flexibility of work and kind of if you're somebody who kind of thrives in this independent kind of lone wolf, you know, aspect, then it might be the right thing.
And full transparency, part of the reason I chose it was because I was going on a big travel trip starting in August. So it was perfect for like, I had 6 months. I wanted to do something. I was able to fit it in there, feel like I got a lot of good experience, and then do something else I'm passionate about for a little while.
Okay. So the getting into your city of Boston work, I think it's super interesting when you think about kind of the services offered by like you know, different municipalities, and you know, especially in the public sector, there's a lot of negative connotations around the kind of how these services are managed and handled. Just think of DMVs. Like nobody likes going to a DMV. You know, maybe you know, it's just like by nature of the type of work you need to do there. Like maybe updating your license registration isn't, you know, super sexy, but I think there is still something to say about the public's perception of these public services. And I'm wondering like if that leaches into like the tech side when you're building these products. I'm not super hands-on with, you know, different like tech tools, like, you know, you're working on the affordable housing web portal, things of that nature. So I can't speak on it myself, but I'm curious if you have any response to the like that general sentiment, and whether that is something that you felt you know, during while building tech products for, you know, the public sector, for the city of Boston in particular.
Yeah, I would say there's definitely, I mean, I think in general, as a country, we live in a time of very high distrust in government for a multitude of reasons. And regardless which one has the impact, I definitely see in my user research this so much of the time, it's really hard to get feedback actually on the tech tool because people are so in a place where they've been like hurt by their interactions with the government sometimes that it's hard to work past that to say like, all right, but is this really like, what's your core problem? Does this solve it in a way that's acceptable or not? And like, if not, then why? And really get to that point of like collaborating with users is tough when there's already kind of this like guarded interaction,
like a bias,
right? Yeah. And I imagine it's the same if you work at an insurance agency or some sort of, place where people already kind of walk in the door being like, what are you going to make me do? Like, I don't, and I think there is some piece of like government being funded by citizens that there's a lot of responsibility put on us to like deliver things that are useful to everybody. But that is a very large audience. And that is like something where then trying to really release minimum viable products isn't going to make everyone happy all the time. So I've found it this balance of really trying to clarify the way that they are represented in our development cycle and to do user research constantly. For me, that's something I've done in all of my roles, but I found it's not always feasible in like the government development cycle to be prioritizing it, but just trying to talk to people as much as I can to really get at like what's going on for them. How do they even enter the site? How do they experience our products on a daily basis, because they might be coming to our housing site having worked with our permit site, and they might have had like a really smooth, easy experience with permits, and then be really disappointed with like whatever's happening over with affordable housing. And because the government is so large, you can have these very different service experiences sometimes. And so I think a lot of it comes down to working across groups, cross collaboration within government, and also staying super focused on service design. This is something I kind of nerd out about. It was a hot thing probably 5-8 years ago to do service design, but to really think about like all the interactions, I think that's honestly where like civic tech can provide the most. It's not necessarily in like these one-off apps or like short-term things, but really thinking through the constituent as the user and what's their journey. Their journey with the government is going to be their whole life, right? How many products have that where you're like, you're going to be interacting with our services from like getting your birth certificate to getting your death certificate. Like, it's like
the full thing.
And so something I found even fascinating within, my department is just thinking about, we think about people who are interested in home ownership as separate from people who are interested in rentals, when our data shows us that like a lot of our visitors are interested in both, and actually a majority are interested in home ownership. And so thinking about, okay, what is that person's interaction, even though there are two different divisions responsible for providing those services, oftentimes it's the same user base, and like we tend to think of them as separate by necessity, right, to run the services, but it's still the same core person. So trying to bring that perspective to the table more and kind of clarify like these are not like constituents don't get like separated that way. They're all interested in having a good home in the city of Boston.
Right. Yeah, that's super interesting. In terms of talk a lot about like the product development life cycle for the city of Boston. How is that different from like your experience at Zaxter? That was the name, right?
Yeah.
So how is it different? The product development lifecycle different between public and private sectors?
Yeah.
Or are they, or is there like a lot of similarities?
I mean, there's definitely more similarities than differences. I have noticed some key differences. I'd say the similarities are really around just like a lot of demands, juggling a lot of different things going on. That's the same. Right. Also, like development resources are always like there's never enough. Anywhere you work as a PM, you're always like, why can't I build more things? So that's very similar, that sense of like, just like, oh, okay, like don't misuse dev resources, or you need to really plan. I'd say what's different so far is that because of the way funding cycles work in city government, or just government in general, you get these capital projects that get funded all at once. And that kind of leads to this balancing between waterfall and agile methodologies that I certainly had to adjust to. Like I always want to be agile and like be constantly iterating and have that sort of empowered product team. But the reality is sometimes the amount of resources that come in one go means you can do like a really intense, awesome release and like have the budget to do something amazing, but you kind of have to follow the step by step version of it, because it is all aimed at this one goal. So it's only my first year, so maybe down the line I'll find a way to use that funding cycle in a more agile sense. But right now, like the main project I'm on, we're definitely going stage by stage, because that's the way we kind of have to like best use the funds and make sure that whatever we're doing was worth the capital investment, right? Because there needs to be this sort of unveiling result release that isn't the same as small iterations every 2 weeks. So, however, that is going on at the same time, right? Like for supporting existing products, yep, existing apps, we have, there are stand-up sprint cycles, that kind of thing, bug squashing days. So all of that is very similar in terms of development, but it's kind of in this dual world that to me comes down to the availability of resources. And the fact is there's better scoping of projects and user needs because it's tax dollars. It's not investor dollars. Like, I mean, bless investors, but like, I didn't use their money always the best way every single time, right? Your job is to like be creative and not have like money be a barrier, right? If you can fund
take more risk.
Take more risk, right? But like, we can't take risk with tax dollars, and we shouldn't be taking major risks with tax dollars, I don't think. And so we need to make sure we know what we're doing and why we're doing it, because we're responsible in a very different way than an investor funded company.
So yeah, that might be the reason that like innovation is kind of like not expected out of the public sector, because you're not being paid to create the next Zillow right now. You're you know, like what your team is working on is trying to, you know, like trying to solve a basic problem in a simple way under the constraints of, you know, taxpayer budget. So it makes
Yeah, and I would say
sense.
a lot of the innovation involved in my role is around how can we be innovative given the policies we're working with, right? Like the boundaries on what you can build and like how you need to build it are very set in stone, and from a source that you really have no control over, right? Like I'm not sitting in meetings with people who are developing policies. I'm receiving them and having to build within those guidelines, which is an interesting dynamic. And I think I'm really starting to see how important it is to have product managers and product owners and not just developers, because developers will just build it and not give any feedback. Whereas being a PM, I can be a bridge to the policy team and say, you know how hard it was to build around area median income? Like, I feel like we could, you know, we could be more user-centric in how we even design policies, right? And that to a certain extent, a software can only go so far until you have that kind of breakthrough at the policy level, right? Because that's kind of the trickle down of what you're working with.
Yeah, for sure.
Blocker.
And I will say one really nice thing I've liked is that there's way more emphasis on accessibility working on government products. Like,
okay.
I always wanted to make like a really accessible mobile app for people with screen readers and, you know, just various types of things. It's been really fun to like have the bandwidth to design for everyone, right? To have people be like, yes, translating into different languages is a priority. Making sure this is screen reader friendly is a priority. It was never a priority in an invested funded company because they were like, oh, that's 3% of your users. Don't worry about them. Right. But like I get to worry about everyone, which is really
nice and wholesome.
Yeah. So that's been an upside too. I like that it, you know, we can't leave anyone behind. And that's part of why we can't move at the same pace as sometimes, or the way that we move is not always the same as say a startup.
Yeah. And that kind of like hits on like managing all your stakeholders. So for like private, you usually just have to manage stakeholders in terms of like your marketing, sales team, or like your exec team. And I feel like for public people like yourself who work for the city of Boston, you have to manage, like you said, like the policy team and also your constituents which you're building the products for. So talk to us maybe about how that is like a whole nother beast in itself, like managing all the different policy teams, all the different stakeholders you could possibly have working for the city of Boston.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's really fun because I like to learn about all these things. I think that's one of the things that to me is something I see across product managers, is that we're very curious people. We want to know why. We want to learn more. And so I've actually I'm like, ooh, I have like 12 stakeholders. They all different. Great. You know, like it definitely can be overwhelming at times, but I think actually I've really enjoyed it because it means I get to learn about areas of government, areas of policy, and areas of what it's like to be a Boston resident that I would never otherwise interact with. So I've definitely done a lot of work to stay in like constant communication and transparency with stakeholders, because there's so much going on all the time for everyone who manages all these various areas, right? So I have a monthly stakeholder meeting where I just am clear about what we've gotten done, what's on deck, getting feedback on it, making sure that no one's being kept out of the loop, because sometimes someone will come to the table with something I had no idea existed, right? Last week I discovered that sometimes for certain types of income restricted housing, you could have your rent would be a % of your income. It would not be a fixed price. And, you know, to them, and that's a great policy idea, right? If you make, $100 a month, yeah, you should not be paying a fixed rent price. You should be able to, but then on the tech side, I was like, oh, we have not built for that, right? I was just like, rent is dollars.
Yep.
And so like we quickly reacted to that, built in a new option and like sort of branch of our database, and we're able to adjust to that. So I think that's like a story of how just coming to your stakeholders and asking questions, being really curious, not being afraid of like wasting someone's time, and just making sure that you're like over communicating what you're doing has been really helpful, especially when there's so many people who are so much more knowledgeable on what they do, right? Like I'm talking to people who are experts, they go to conferences on this stuff, they know it pat, and they know why it is the way it is. And I don't need to know all that. So that's why my stakeholders are super valuable. I don't have to take that all on. I just have to digest it in terms of what we're prioritizing and how it would impact our strategy. So
get the Spark notes.
Yeah, basically. And then just be like, were these the Spark notes? Because there's some very nuanced pieces here. And it's one of those things where like we work with the office that supports renters, we work with the office that supports homeowners, we work with the people who help set the, who know how the median income guidelines get determined. We know, all these various perspectives. And then I think the biggest thing for me with stakeholder management is knowing the difference between stakeholder requirements and user requirements. Because I think stakeholders very often see their requirements as user requirements. But you have to understand that as the person who's doing user research, or hopefully you're doing user research, or you're connected to your customers in a way that you are getting those requirements somewhere else. And there will be overlap, but a lot of time, I think it's important not to have stakeholders speaking for your users, but rather speaking for their perspectives, knowing that their perspectives are valuable in a different way. And so that's something that I think is really important in terms of getting more user-centric civic tech out there, is not just building for users that are in people's minds or even in advocates' minds, but really just talking to people. They're like, you're searching for a house. You've been on your cousin's couch for 9 months. Like, let's make sure this represents your priorities in the order you think, rather than saying the priorities in the order that someone who's worked with people like that for 20 years. That is an amazing knowledge set and super valuable, but it's going to be a different list of priorities because they have 20 years worth of sort of anecdotal information versus the sort of like in the real time market need, this moment of this housing crisis kind of situation. And the nice thing is that the more you advocate for your users, and the more your stakeholders start to want to get in touch with that too. So it kind of builds this great feedback loop. So I love getting to share back findings from user research with people because everyone's really curious. I presented at the all team meeting, 6 months ago about our findings to the entire department. And it's really important that information be out there and that everyone understand like who we're serving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as product managers, try not to prescribe solutions, but it happens all the time.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of solution forward in any product you're looking at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've got the answer, and because I have the answer, I also have the problem. Rather than, I have a problem.
Yeah. So something that I try and work against, like when doing user research, is like the confirmation bias that kind of comes through in the survey or interview questions and just throughout the interview. I'm curious, from your perspective, since I bet you have much more user research background than I do, like what your methodology is, especially given like how diverse a like potential like user base you're building for is, and like how are you able, like when you do have that 3.5% of people who are like hard of hearing or hard of seeing, but you do have to build for them, like how are you able to kind of take that into account in the kind of whole prioritization process, and understanding that there's still a lot of constraints, and then also like how you're kind of organizing your user research to try and account for all of these different personas? Or do you find that they're actually like there's a lot of overlap, and especially for
I mean, it's always a Venn diagram, right? Of like everyone has their sort of priorities, but there's so much overlap. So it's definitely still aiming for those and saying like, this is what we can release with, because end of the day, you can know your users so well that you will spend your entire life planning the perfect product and never releasing it. So like, and I think that's honestly why user research sometimes doesn't get prioritized at companies, because people say this will slow us down. Like if we know everything about everyone, if we understand the problem so fully, we're never going to get anything done, because it can go that direction. And I think especially when you sort of have to serve a broader user base. so for me, I guess my methodology is like, it's very focused on a mix of both having sort of constant surveys out there so that I'm getting that pulse, right? Like I can do a pulse check. I can check in. What are people saying about the product? What are people saying about housing searches? What's going on in the field? But then when I do a user research round, really like, and I have to work really hard not to like help people through the product, but just handing them the product and just being like, show me how you use it. Like I'm a big fan of doing the, like whenever you have just time, doing the occasional hands off, just watch someone use it situation.
Usability.
Or using, usability testing is a big one.
Yeah, those are always tough because you're like, oh, just click that right there. You're
it's
so close.
You're like, or
like,
you know, someone totally bypasses the feature you've been working on for like a month. And you're like, no.
Exactly.
Yes. So, I mean, I think that we actually just did a round of persona testing this past week, and it was so enlightening because it was a totally different reality where we realized that we actually have this sort of disappointing situation where sometimes there's the minimum income qualification for housing, and like it's very hard to represent that as part of the user journey. And so a lot of people get to the point where they get really excited about a unit, they know they qualify, but then there's this last moment of like, all of a sudden on the journey map, they just like plummet down of like, I don't qualify after all. So kind of, the persona testing I think is really important especially for our situation. You know, sometimes we're building for case managers who are helping people who might not actually have access to a computer standardly. And in terms of prioritization, I definitely still lean towards the like biggest reach, right? What's gonna really knock it out of the park for the most people, while also understanding that the only way you can have a really responsible civic tech product is to make sure that you are prioritizing the things that matter to people who aren't as commonly represented. So for me, you know, it's about, okay, maybe we won't have a fully accessible, like every single action is like keyboard ready by the time we release, but one we can work, and two, we want to make sure we release where the key actions, the key elements you need to be able to interact with are there and are usable. So we're not locking you out of any part of the experience that's core to the user journey. So you might not be, you know, and trying to just aim for that over perfection, because if we design for perfection for every party, it's not going to happen. And it's hard when especially when there's projects like this that have taken a lot of time. People get very bought into it being exactly what they need and want when you launch it. And so that's one thing one reason I really, you know, hope to move towards more agile methodologies is because I think it sort of takes that pressure off, right? You're like,
I'm getting it perfect.
We're going to be here. We don't have to be perfect because we're going to be here again in 2 weeks. You know, it's like, we're going to learn, we're going to try it. We're going to test it out. And, you know, that opportunity to try things, that freedom to explore, I think is really essential to designing good products, and to being able to react to people's needs. But I hope that answered the user research question.
Yeah, no, I posed it terribly. I want to ask so many things, and I tried to fit 3 questions into one.
Well, just so you know, I don't have a hard stop at 2, so.
Fair enough. Good to know. I actually just had my 2:00 canceled.
Great.
Yeah, you know, make it up. But you were talking about what it takes to build a great product, and something that I think is a theme, and you know what you've been doing is that you've been, you know, building or working on projects that you're really passionate about. So working on the bike share program, which is something that, you know, you just told us you biked, you know, 120 miles this weekend, and you know,
insane.
Also,
kudos to you.
That's
Thank you.
And then all the way to, you know, working in, you know, it's kind of working in the civic sector, trying to help people, especially finding affordable housing. Like, I feel like, I don't know, definitely not at the same level, but, you know, the reason I'm able to like work the extra hours and, you know, feel like I'm doing good work at Parlors, because I feel like I'm passionate about product management and, you know, like user feedback is our jam, and we're selling to product managers. So I feel like there is something there about kind of being in just a domain that you're excited about. And like, how has that impacted the work that you're doing, and also like the the places that you put yourself in? So I feel like a lot of people, especially right now where job insecurity is so big, people are like willing to kind of, or like might have to take a stab in something new or something they're not as excited about. And I know it's definitely a luxury to be working on products or projects that you're passionate about.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where knowing your own compass is really important, right? Like, there's a lot of ways to fuel passion, and one thing I feel like the social impact sector doesn't do super well is they make it seem like if you have a social impact job, somehow your job's like better than other jobs. It's still a job. Like, you're still doing it to get paid, and like, and to have and so I definitely try to like not perpetuate that, because I think like for me, that is really motivating. It's always been something that's really motivated me. And so I don't want to lose track of that in my career. And I think that is true for a lot of people who feel like they don't have that option. And I think it's important to always, if you know you have that passion, like keep an eye out for it. Like whatever job you have to do in the meantime, do that and do it well. Like my saying is, be the Leslie Knope of whatever you're doing. And yeah, I'm such a civic tech nerd.
I would be upset if you didn't make a Parks and Rec, joke.
I've never watched Parks and Rec, so I was completely lost, and I just smiled and nodded along.
I appreciate that. It will make sense if you watch one episode. It will make sense. Okay. But yeah, I think there are a lot of people who actually are looking for jobs with bigger impact. Like I think that our parents' generation didn't set us up with a ton of great job opportunities, right? Mm. The only places you can make money are the finance sector or like high-end tech solutions or pharmaceuticals, which, they're great industries in themselves. There's ways to be passionate about that work. And I don't knock anyone who's in that field. But for me, I was like, those don't line up with my priorities. Like those aren't things that I think the world really needs more of. Like, honestly, if we were curing people, we probably wouldn't need so many pharmaceuticals. Like, should those be the growing companies in a happy society? I don't know. And so I think there is something to like, at whatever point in your career you have the luxury of choice, and it is a luxury. I mean, for me, sometimes it comes down to a decision point. Like last summer I was job searching. I was in an associate PM offer for like an early stage startup. It was a very glitzy job. It was a lot of the like shiny, like we're going to make you a full PM in 6 months kind of thing. Mm. And then this job. And like, I mean, they lined up in a lot of other factors, but end of the day, this was the job I was going to want to show up to after 12 months. Whereas I think the other one, it wasn't a product I was passionate about. Mm-hmm. It was focused on selling things, and that just doesn't make me tick. So when you do have those choices, like listening to yourself and being okay with the fact that like it's not going to look shiny, right? Like I'm not going to be able to talk about my job and not get a lot of backlash for how affordable housing is hard right now, right? Like you have to sort of be prepared for that. So I think it's a lot about prioritizing end results over shiny products. And for me, that's sort of stayed true to my compass. And it's also helped me build a network of mission-centric colleagues across sectors, which I really appreciate. Like I've worked in nonprofits, I've worked in private sector, I'm now working in public sector. I think this is so a team effort, like things that are good for people, that make them happy, that really serve humans can happen anywhere. And so as a product person, I think we have sort of a great privilege because we have so much power over what these things do. And, but that's also like a great burden, right? Because anytime you have that, for me, it's something no pressure, but like, for me, that's what kind of makes me happiest is even when I'm like frazzled, I'm like, oh, okay. But like, I have this chance to do something that like, there's only one person doing this right now for a city of Boston, and it's me. And like, that is, I don't know, like that's definitely keeps me fueled and keeps me humble too, to just say like, wow, like this is pretty awesome, even though it doesn't come with like all the perks. Like there's no pet spa downstairs. So
City of Boston doesn't have beer on tap?
It doesn't.
Well, good, because I'd
But
be
there are some great pubs nearby.
breaking down the door. Oh, man.
And I do think the cool thing is that like governments are really starting to see the impact of technology. I mean, I'm starting to see a lot of, I think the news captures some of the civic tech fails pretty well, but there's a lot of really great civic tech wins happening out there. And I think they're starting to make space for it more and more in their budgets in terms of it being like, I follow Marty Kagan, and his thing is, right, like every company is a software company. Every organization is a software company now, because that, like this crisis, this pandemic shows us more than anything, we are all software companies. And I think the government is also a software organization at this point, right? Like if you're going to reach people, if you're going to serve people, that's where you're at. And so, I see cities making investments all over the country in this. There's a lot of great groups like Code for America that are focused on supporting government becoming more tech forward and see it as a democratizing tool. So that's exciting.
Yeah, exciting stuff. I think that about does it for today. Amy, we appreciate you coming on and sharing the wisdom of all the public sector PM stuff. Super fascinating.
I hope I didn't wax too poetical there, but
no, you didn't. It was perfect.
The perfect amount.
Great. Well, this is a really fun opportunity. I'm glad you all reached out, and I'm glad Caitlin mentioned my name, and I've enjoyed it.
Of course, we'll have to have you back at some point for round 2.
Oh, I know. Talk to me in a year. We'll see what happens.
And let us know when the project you're working on is released. We'd love to kind of make sure we push it out to our local networks.
Yeah, give you a shout.
Totally. That'd be great. We're hustling really hard to hit peak housing search time, so should be out there soon.
Right.
Cool.
Right.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Stay tuned. Thanks so much, Amy. You're the best.
Thank you all. It was great chatting.